Queensland Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk is defending her decision. She says that she'll keep the borders closed until September. But given there was no medical advice to shut the borders in the first place, the federal government is pushing for state borders to reopen.
If we continue to see the national success in containing COVID-19, as things like restaurants and pubs reopen and we get things gradually back to normal with appropriate social distancing, then there's no reason, if all of those next steps are successful, that we can't see borders reopen well before September.
Margy Osmond, she's Chief Executive Officer of the Tourism and Transport Forum, and she joins me now from Sydney. Margy, you know, your sector incredibly hard hit. 1 in 13 Australians are employed in tourism. You got to want those borders opened.
We certainly do. 1 in 13 Australians were employed in tourism, I think, is the critical point there, Peter. I think the industry has suffered hideously, and I genuinely believe much worse than most others, simply because we have the double whammy of the bushfires and now COVID-19, and the prospect of our capacity to start operating properly continually being pushed further and further back.
Look, we know that there was no medical advice, certainly medical advice to shut the national borders, but no medical advice to shut the state borders. State premiers acted as they did. I understand why. You know, there's a lot of politics involved in this. But if we can't open up the international borders, I don't think anyone's suggesting that right now, surely we've got to start to rebuild the tourism sector by getting and encouraging Australians who can't travel overseas to at least holiday in their own country. How confident are you that you're going to get some movement before September, as Annastacia Palaszczuk is currently only committing till then?
Look, my understanding is that, you know, September is worst case scenario. I think we're still quietly optimistic that we're going to see some movement well before then. We've got July school holidays coming up. At the very least, we've got to have a relaxation of intra-state travel for that. But ideally, we'd like to see some of these borders open as close to July, after July as possible. I think, you know, the issue here is that the industry has never quibbled with the health advice and the need to keep Australians safe. That's got to be paramount. We get that. But I think the issue for us now is that we need some certainty, because you can't just turn the tap back on. It takes some time to gear up the businesses. So we need some certainty about when these borders are going to open.
I think the certainty is incredibly important, because I think a lot of people are reluctant to even book something because they fear that they might book it and not be able to travel. I think they're also fearful that if they book it and have to move the travel date because things aren't open, they may have issues getting their money back or their deposits or whatever. What are you specifically wanting to see the government, state governments, do here?
Well, look, we have a national cabinet now, Peter, and I think a fabulous innovation. Let's do away with COAG and never have it back again. I like this national cabinet idea. So we have an opportunity for all of the premiers to make a more collegiate decision. And while I understand very clearly that different states have different priorities, different infection rates, some states have biosecurity legislation like the Northern Territory, WA, South Australia, but nevertheless, people want to start moving around. And look, on the basis of consumer work that we've just done, for us by Newgate, we know that people are just desperate to get out and visit friends and family in the first instance. And as soon as they can travel interstate, the first place they want to go is the Gold Coast. And I hope Premier Palaszczuk is listening to that.
Talk to me about travel bubbles. We think we may have one with New Zealand in the next couple of months. Where do you sit on opening up international borders? Because I think that's the most troubling thing with consumers. I think state borders fine. I think it's a bridge too far for most people to think about travelling overseas, or am I wrong?
Well, look, there is still, according to our research at the moment, a high level of interest in overseas travel, but I think that sectors of the community have moved a bit. It's sort of millennials and people over 55 are the ones most interested in going overseas, unless it's New Zealand. And I think, you know, New Zealand is our second biggest inbound market anyway, so it's really critically important that that one comes back online. I think the government will I hope very wisely, decide that the borders they need to open up first are those with countries that have a similar disease and management profile as Australia. So New Zealand's an obvious one, and we have a lot to give each other. And it's probably about a 50-50% benefit if we open up. We'll both get something out of it. We're working very hard with the Australia-New Zealand Leadership Forum to come up with a process that makes government comfortable and, more to the point, makes travellers comfortable, because we have to have them feeling confident about this. And then if that works, and I would hope we'll see that before the end of this calendar year, we're certainly hoping to have a plan to government in June, July. After that, then I think legitimately you can start thinking about other ports that have a good profile with the virus management. So Japan, perhaps South Korea, perhaps Taiwan, perhaps Hong Kong, maybe some Pacific countries, Singapore, for example. But I think we're a long way off seeing the sort of UK's and the US and Europe coming back into the mix.
Sadly, I think you're right there, Margy, Osmond, but not a bad thing that Australians travel and holiday at home. Thank you for your time.
Dust off that bucket list and get out into the Aussie.
Absolutely. Margy, Osmond, thanks very much.
Thank you.